So you've got the perfect plan to get a girlfriend. You bust out your unplugged electric guitar, preferably on a picnic blanket somewhere sunny, with just the two of you, and you play the object of your affection an original song perfectly designed to sweep her off her feet. Except there's one problem. As you continue through your song, the delight in her eyes turns to confusion, then to disappointment, and then finally to contempt. As you strum your last chord, she gets up off your picnic blanket and says, "Sorry, those chords you were playing, they were just too bland. You've blown it again." Well, fear not, your next courtship crusade will be a success after you watch this video and equip yourself with 5 sus chords you need to get yourself a girlfriend. Now, what is a sus chord? It may surprise you to know that it has little at all to do with Among Us. In fact, I'm too much of a boomer to even get that reference. No, a sus chord is a special type of chord with no major third or minor third, but rather the fourth of the chord used in place of either. Sus chords can have a huge effect on the music they're in. The right kind of sus chord can make a piece sound romantic, or upbeat, or even devastatingly beautiful. These chords have a long history of use in music, which means there are very specific behavioral tendencies that differ depending on the type of chord and era of music in which they're used. And today we're going to walk through 5 different kinds to show you what they can do. First, let's look at the most basic example and tackle where the name sus even comes from. Back in the 1700s, musicians were wooing girls polyphonically, carefully nudging along each individual note they were playing rather than thinking of these notes in big categorized chunks that we call chords. So sometimes, if they were being extra slick, when bringing the music to a conclusion, they would take one of the notes from right before the big finale and hold it over past where all of its friends had already moved ahead. This last note would stay suspended for as long as it could manage, casting a longing backward glance before finally turning ahead and moving down to its inevitable resting place. The word suspension is where the term sus chord comes from. It's a really great move, very powerful even in its most basic form. And while any note could be held over as a suspension from the previous bar, the most powerful choice is called the 4-3 suspension. In this, the approaching chord must contain the 4th note of the key and hold that note over into the final chord before settling down onto the 3rd with a sense of grace and playfulness. Early game music, the kind written for the NES or Game Boy especially, borrowed a lot of compositional techniques from polyphonic music as a way of dealing with the limitations of the hardware, which was only able to output 3 tones at one time. The Pokemon trading card game Game Boy Game's title theme ends with a beautiful example of a 4-3 suspension. The second last chord, a G7, sets up a resolution to C, but the F note included in that G7 chord carries over into the final C chord, giving us a C sus that only resolves to our home C major one full bar later. This kind of thing has a really warm sound to it, doesn't it? The theory-minded among you will have noticed that this G7 chord also features the exact same kind of 4-3 suspension, with the C note in the melody held over from the previous bar's D7 over F sharp chord, and only allowed to settle down on the 3rd of this G7 chord on beat 3 of the bar. Final Fantasy IX's Eye to Eye ends with similar warmth, its final phrase settling on our tonic C major chord, moving to an F chord, and then resolving back to C major with a 4-3 suspension, giving this resolution a little more movement and color. The F note, the 4th of the final C chord, was held over from the previous F chord, but actually the A note from that chord was held over as well, only being allowed to resolve down to the 5th of our home C chord in the last bar of the melody. This is an example of combined 4-3 and 6-5 suspensions. These suspensions aren't exclusively used for ending a phrase, though. You often see notes suspended over from a previous bar as an embellishment of the 5 chord of the key, the chord that pushes us toward a resolution. We just saw this in our first Pokemon example. If a 5-7 chord moving to the 1 chord feels like launching the listener towards a resolution, then having most of the voices move to the 5-7 chord and leaving one note suspended before it joins the rest is like pulling back the slingshot, then stretching it back even farther, and then letting it go for a supercharged resolution. Final Fantasy VI's famous aria de mezzo carattere takes a heartfelt D major melody and ends the phrase with a darker turn to F sharp minor, with a C sharp 7 chord used to deliver the bad news. The suspended note here is found in the melody. The third of our home D major chord, F sharp, holds over to become the fourth of the following C sharp chord before stepping down to the third, using the momentum to bring us to the following F sharp minor chord with a sense of grim finality. Each loop through the chord progression in Nier's beautiful track Grandma ends with a G-flat major 7 chord moving to an F7 chord, propelling us to the home chord B-flat minor. Each time, the B-flat note from this G-flat major chord is held over to create an F7 sus chord that then moves to an F7 chord to send us back to the top of the loop. If a 4-3 suspension on the resolving chord feels warm and gentle, the same suspension on a 5 chord makes the resolution more dramatic. You get this feeling of ready, steady, then go! And if adding drama is in your game plan to winning a girl's heart, then you'll need to make use of our second sus chord. Your prospective girlfriend is going to want to be with a guy who can surprise her, and there's no better tool for that than using a sus chord to stretch out the 5 chord. See, over the years, it became clear that these suspended notes didn't actually need to be held over from a previous chord. You could just move from whatever chord you're on to a sus 4 chord, and then from that sus 4 chord to a regular dominant chord. If your phrase would end on the 5 chord, ending it on a 5 sus chord instead allows you to add an extra bar to the phrase as that sus chord turns into a regular 5 chord. And breaking out of the typical structure of a phrase with an added bar creates a nice moment of surprise that still feels earned because the movement of the voices is so natural. You hear this in Errol's theme from The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. The beautiful, sincere melody leaps up and then drifts down to the end of the phrase, but that last note doesn't jump back into the next phrase of melody right away. Instead, it holds out while an extra bar gives us a delicate B7 sus to B7 maneuver. This extra bar gives the melody a little extra time to breathe, and it makes it feel more heartfelt. Octopath Traveler uses this move all over its soundtrack. In How Amusing, the disorienting series of rapid-fire key changes towards the end of the loop comes to a halt on an A7 sus chord, with an extra bar added to the phrase to give the chord space to move to an A7 to bring us back to the key of D minor to start the loop over. The extra space here helps ground us in the right key, a way of gently bringing the listener down from all the crazy key changes that preceded it and getting us back home where we started. In Ophelia the Cleric's theme, the introduction in F major lands squarely on an F sus chord in the 8th bar, and then pads out the intro with an extra 9th bar moving to an F chord, a dramatic pause added for greater effect. This F sus to F transitions nicely into the key of G minor for the main melody of the piece, adding subtle and delicate key change tactic to the list of what the sus chord can do. Adding a bar here and there can certainly keep a lady guessing, but if the object of your affection has a discerning ear, she'll already know what to expect the second that sus chord comes in to end the phrase. If you want to show her that you're really full of surprises, you've got to master the Fakeout major resolution. See, since sus chords lack the third of the chord, which defines whether a chord is major or minor, they exist in a limbo between the two. It's like Schrodinger's chord. Each sus chord is both major and minor until it resolves. Well, no. Because the piece of music will be in a key, our ears will naturally expect the suspended fourth of any chord to fall onto a note that belongs in the key. But breaking this expectation is a great way to add a twist to a piece of music. In the Ocarina of Time cue, when you open the door to the Temple of Time, the key of D minor is immediately established with this repeating D minor triad melody over top of a descending bass line. The bass brings us down to the 5 chord, A7, which then resolves to a D sus chord, the G note from that A7 holding over for a bar before resolving down not to our minor third, but a major third F sharp note. Notice how that fourth doesn't move straight down to the third. It dips down to the note below and then bounces back up. That's a very common embellishment of the typical sus chord resolution. Resolving to a surprise major chord when you were expecting minor can give the music a hopeful spin. This is a big part of the sound of Chrono Trigger's soundtrack, as we see this move come up a few different times throughout the game. In the titular track, we set up a resolution to B minor with this walk up from G to A to B minor. The answering phrase ends instead on a B sus chord, which then resolves to a B major. This isn't a key change, the piece stays in the key of B minor after this fakeout. The B major chord is just a little surprise moment of hopefulness within the moody minor key. The Undersea Palace theme opens with the bass outlining an F minor to A flat to B flat minor progression under this repeating synth figure. When the string pads come in the second time around and play this last chord as a B flat sus, moving to a B flat major, it comes as a bit of a surprise. The opening of Wings That Cross Time does this too, establishing a very clear G minor key center with this descending chord progression and then ending it with a G sus to G major maneuver. I'm sure you get the picture. Chrono Trigger does this a lot. These sus chord fakeouts can go the other direction too. In The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess's Hyrule Field theme, there's a beautiful melodic section that comes in the key of D major, with a walk up from B minor to A over C sharp, resolving to this D major 7 chord. This section ends with a big build-up, moving from the 4 chord, G, to the 5 chord, A, and then up to the flat 6 and flat 7 chords, B flat and C. This is a classic Nintendo way to build intensity. The 4 and 5 chords setting up the 1, but then deking us out with flat 6 and flat 7 chords, creating a bigger, more dramatic resolution up to the tonic chord. And we do rock it up to a D chord here, but it's a D sus chord. After a minor key statement of the main Legend of Zelda theme, this D sus resolves not to the D major we expect, but moves bitterly to a D minor chord. That moment is just gut-wrenching. The surprise major chord in a minor key is a lot more common than the surprise minor chord in a major key, but this move is a perfect way to sell the grim tone of Twilight Princess's world. Okay, listen, I get it. You want to be the dark, moody, mysterious guy to get a girl interested, but if you want a girlfriend, you also gotta be fun to be around. You gotta be able to have a good time, you gotta keep the party rockin', and there's no better chord for that than what I think of as the soul 5 chord. We've seen how a lot of these suspended fourths end up on the 5 chord of the key, like, say, a B sus4 in the key of E. And a lot of the time, 5 chords will have their 7th tacked on, so say, a B7 sus4 in the key of E. Well, what happens if we add the 9th of the chord in for some color? A B9 sus4 in the key of E. If we look at the 7th, 9th, and suspended 4th, we see that those notes make up an A major triad. The major triad found a whole step below the root of the chord. If we ditch the 5th of the chord, you can write this as an A over B, and this is the soul 5 chord sound. This chord, a major triad built a whole step below the bass note, is nimble, colorful, and joyful. It's basically the default way to play a 5 chord for a lot of styles of music, like soul and gospel and jazz fusion, and in any music that's trying to sound lighthearted and upbeat and fun, you'll probably find a few of these thrown in there. Check it out in the funky good vibes of the Sonic Mania title screen music. In the key of G, a C over D chord sets up a resolution to the tonic, but we swerve left and land instead on an E flat major 7. Whew, beautiful. In Tokyo Daylight from Persona 5, this funky groove takes a turn with this D minor 7 to F over G chord, pivoting towards an A major 7. This is one of the rare chords that has all of the color of a dense extended chord, but none of the pretentious atmosphere. You'll find these chords used almost universally across the Mario Kart 8 soundtrack, but possibly the best showcase of the vibe of this chord is the way these B flat over C chords are used as the 5 throughout Super Bell Subway's theme. You can hear the same fun, light-hearted sound across all of these examples, accentuated by the energetic rhythms and arrangements. Clearly, this is a required tool for anybody trying to be exciting enough to finally get a girlfriend. Now, for the 5th and final type of sus chord, we are living the high life. Think luxury cars. Think private jets. Think buying a first edition shadowless holographic Charizard card on a whim. Only the most cutting edge and elite songsters can pull off this one. The idea here is to take our last soul 5 chord and instead of using it as the 5 chord in a key, using it non-functionally. Moving these types of chords around, starting on different root notes, taking care to avoid fitting into one key, is a surefire way to create a truly elite vibe. KK Fusion from Animal Crossing is a perfect example of this technique because it's basically a parody of jazz fusion music where this technique is omnipresent. We start by grooving out on a B flat over C chord, then jump to D flat over E flat and C flat over D flat chords before settling back down to B flat over C. Later on, we jump to G over A and C over D chords, totally different and tonally distant chord moves, but all using the same sus chord structure.
Now,
This kind of non-functional harmony avoids any straightforward chord resolutions, and so the chord that we sit on for the longest inevitably becomes the one we feel as home. Making your home chord a sus chord is a great way to imbue the whole tune with a floaty, ethereal quality. The menu music from Super Smash Bros. Melee indulges in this wispiness in its bridge to contrast the hard-hitting opening, but the hard-hitting vibe immediately returns to create a fantastic, non-functional 1-2 punch. Jumping around between chords that don't fit together in one key is also a great way to create drama, and Final Fantasy Tactics Advance's Companions That Surpassed Their Tribe uses these drifting sus chords as part of a grand orchestral introduction. The constant upward motion from F over G to A flat over B flat to D flat over E flat ensures a growing intensity that works wonderfully to introduce the piece. But also, the exclusive use of these Soul 5 chord voicings maintains a lighthearted and upbeat quality throughout this figure. You know what? At this point, this girl might actually be too intimidated by your music theory prowess to go out with you. Oh, what have you done? In your quest for self-improvement, you forgot the very reason you sought to better yourself in the first place. Sure, now you're laughing it up in private jets with music theory enthusiasts and selling out chord knowledge conferences worldwide, but without a girlfriend by your side, it all somehow seems empty. I'm so sorry for ruining this for you. You know what, just leave the sus chords at home and get her some flowers or something. If you want the full transcriptions for all of the music I showed in this video, check out my Patreon page. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.